My daughter-in-law slapped me in the face and demanded my house keys. The sting of it was sharp and immediate, a crack of sound that seemed to silence the cheerful music of the wedding reception. For a frozen second, the world was just Ava's furious, perfectly made-up face, her lips curled back in a sneer that belied the angelic white of her dress. "It's our house now, Karen," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me, though the sting on my cheek was a public declaration. "Ethan is my husband. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. Hand them over." I stood there, amidst the soft glow of fairy lights and the scent of roses and champagne, and felt the foundation of my entire life crumble into dust. My son Ethan stood a few feet away, his back to us, laughing with a groomsman, utterly oblivious or worse, willfully ignorant of the grotesque scene his new bride was making. That slap was not just an act of violence, it was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, a final brutal severing of the woman I used to be from the woman I would have to become. My life, until that moment, had been a tapestry woven with the threads of sacrifice. I was Karen Green, a woman of 62 years, defined not by my own desires but by the needs of others. For 25 years, I had been the wife of Anthony, a man whose charm was as boundless as his infidelity. I played the part of the supportive spouse, hosting his business dinners and ironing his shirts, all while knowing he was sharing his affection, and our money, with a rotating cast of younger women. I stayed for Ethan. That was my mantra, the phrase I repeated to myself in the dead of night when the scent of another woman's perfume clung to his suit jacket. I stayed so my son could have a home with 2 parents, a stability I foolishly believed could be built on a foundation of lies and my own silent, gnawing misery. The divorce, when it finally came, felt less like a failure and more like a weary exhalation. Anthony left for a woman half my age, leaving me with the house, a house I had paid for with my inheritance from my parents, and a heart full of scar tissue. Ethan became my world, the sole focus of my reconstituted life. I poured everything I had into him, every ounce of love, every dollar I could spare. I saw my role as his mother not just as a guide but as a facilitator, a remover of obstacles. When he wanted a car at 16, I took a second job cleaning offices at night to afford the down payment and the insurance. When he chose an expensive private university, I cashed in the bonds my father had left me, telling myself that his education was the only inheritance that truly mattered. I saw it as an investment in his future, a future I believed would be bright and full of gratitude. He was a good boy then, or so I remember. He was affectionate, calling me every Sunday, remembering my birthday, telling me he loved me. The boy I raised would never have stood by while a woman, any woman, laid a hand on his mother. Then came Ava. She entered our lives like a slow creeping vine, beautiful and delicate at first, but with a stranglehold grip. She was an expert at feigned sweetness, a master of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Karen, this house is so charming," she'd said on her first visit, her eyes scanning my comfortable, lived-in furniture with a barely concealed disdain. "It has such potential." I didn't understand then that potential was her code for everything she intended to gut and replace, myself included. Ethan was besotted, blind to the way she subtly belittled me, the way she would interrupt my stories or answer questions directed at me. He saw her as ambitious and driven. I saw a void of entitlement that could never be filled. Their relationship was a constant drain on my resources. It started small. "Mom, Ava's car broke down. Could you help us with the repair bill?" Just until I get my bonus. The bonus never seemed to materialize, but the requests kept coming. They needed help with a deposit for a new apartment, a fancier one she insisted they had to have. They needed a loan for a vacation to de-stress, a trip from which they posted glossy, smiling photos on social media while I ate toast for dinner to make my pension stretch. I gave it all every time. I gave it because I was terrified of losing my son. Each check I wrote felt like a payment to keep him in my life, a toll I had to pay to the gatekeeper who was his fiancée. Ethan's calls became less frequent, and when he did call, Ava was always on the line, her voice a saccharine presence guiding the conversation toward their latest financial need. I was no longer his mother. I was his personal bank, and my balance was dwindling. The wedding planning was a masterclass in my own erasure. My opinions were not solicited, and when offered, they were dismissed with a patronizing smile from Ava. "That's a sweet idea, Karen, but we're going for a more modern aesthetic." Modern, I learned meant expensive. It meant a venue I couldn't imagine affording, a dress that cost more than my car, and a guest list filled with her friends and family, with only a handful of my own relatives squeezed in as an afterthought. I offered to contribute what I could, a significant sum that represented years of careful saving. Ava accepted the check without so much as a thank you, simply tucking it into her designer purse as if it were pocket change. Ethan saw my strained face and just squeezed my arm. "It means a lot, Mom. We couldn't do this without you." But his words felt hollow, a rehearsed line to keep the money flowing. I felt like a spectator at my own son's life, an investor in a project from which I would see no return. The wedding day itself was a blur of forced smiles and a profound sense of dislocation. I wore a beige dress Ava had called age-appropriate, a phrase that made me feel like a piece of antique furniture being politely ignored in a corner. I watched my son, my beautiful boy, stare at his bride with an adoration that was once reserved for me. I saw the way he deferred to her, the way his posture changed in her presence, becoming smaller, less certain. During the speeches, Ava's father talked at length about his daughter's ambition and drive. Ethan's speech was all about Ava, how she had changed his life, how she was his everything. He mentioned me only once, a quick, cursory, "And thanks to my mom," for everything. The word hung in the air, a vague and dismissive summary of a lifetime of devotion. The confrontation happened near the cake cutting. I had stepped away to the patio for a breath of fresh air, the noise and the cloying sweetness of the reception becoming overwhelming. Ava followed me out. Her smile was gone, replaced by a hard, predatory glint in her eyes. "We need to talk about the house," she said, no preamble, no pleasantries. I was confused. "What about the house?" I asked. "Well, Ethan and I have been discussing it. It's far too big for one person. And we're thinking about our future, about kids. We'll need a family home." The audacity of it stole my breath. She was talking about my home, the place I had raised my son, the only thing that was truly mine. "Ava," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "this is my home. I'm not planning on going anywhere." That was when her face hardened into the mask of fury I would never forget. "Don't be selfish, Karen," she snapped. "You've had your life. It's our turn now. We've decided we'll move in after the honeymoon. You can find a small apartment, maybe in one of those senior communities." The words were like stones, each one a heavy blow. She spoke of my life as if it were a completed chapter, a book to be closed and put on a shelf. She spoke of me as if I were already dead. I found a flicker of strength from some deep, forgotten well inside me. "No," I said, the word small but firm. "Absolutely not. This is my house," and that is when she slapped me. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. Her hand, adorned with the sparkling diamond ring I had helped pay for, left a fiery imprint on my skin and on my soul. "Give me the keys," she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't make this ugly." I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, each step deliberate, my back straight, my burning cheek turned away from the party. I walked through the smiling, dancing guests, a ghost at their feast. I saw Ethan finally turning, a look of mild concern on his face. He started towards me, but Ava intercepted him, whispering something in his ear, placing a calming hand on his chest. He stopped. He let me go. He chose her. That was the moment my heart truly broke, not with the noisy shatter of a grand explosion, but with the silent, crystalline crack of something frozen and fragile. I got into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I drove home, the 10-mile journey feeling like a passage across a desolate, alien planet. The house was dark and silent when I arrived. I locked the door behind me, and for the first time, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress. I slid down against the door and finally let the sobs come, raw, ragged sounds of a grief so profound it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside out. The days that followed were a thick, gray fog. I didn't answer the phone, which rang incessantly with calls from Ethan and texts that swung wildly between feigned concern. "Mom, are you okay? We're worried," and indignant anger. "How could you just walk out of my wedding? You ruined our night." I moved through my house like a wraith, the slap replaying in my mind on a torturous loop. The physical sting had faded, but the emotional wound festered. It was the humiliation, the sheer breathtaking disrespect. It was the image of my son standing by, His inaction a louder condemnation than any word he could have spoken. I would catch my reflection in a window or a mirror and see a stranger. A pale, tired old woman with haunted eyes and a slack, defeated mouth. Who was this person? Where was the capable, loving mother I had always believed myself to be? She had been a fool, a willing participant in her own diminishment. I spent hours in Ethan's old bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed, running my hands over the sports trophies on his shelf, flipping through photo albums from his childhood. Here he was, a gap-toothed 7-year-old beaming at his birthday party. Here he was, a lanky teenager in his graduation gown, his arms slung around my shoulders. In every picture I was there, a constant presence, my face glowing with a pride that was almost painful to look at now. I was searching for the boy I had loved, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he had vanished, replaced by the stranger who had married that venomous woman. But the past offered no answers, only more pain. The love I had felt was real, but it had been a one-sided currency, spent freely without ever being replenished. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The turning point was not a dramatic epiphany. It was a quiet, mundane moment. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single plate, and I happened to glance out the window into my backyard. A fat, resilient dandelion had pushed its way through a crack in the patio stones. It stood alone, battered by the wind, yet its sunny yellow head was tilted defiantly towards the sun. I stared at it for a long time. It was a weed, an unwanted thing, and yet it was stubbornly, unapologetically alive. And in that moment something shifted inside me. The fog of grief began to thin, and through it, I felt the first hot spark of anger. Not the wild, helpless rage of a victim, but something different. It was a cold, clarifying fury. The sadness had burned itself out, leaving behind a hard, dense core of resolve. I was not a weed to be trampled on. I was not a chapter to be closed. I was Karen Green, and this was my house, my life. And I was going to take it back. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down at my desk with a pen and a clean legal pad. I started to write. I titled the first page, "The Cost of Ethan." It was not an emotional exercise. It was an audit. I went through old bank statements, credit card bills, and checkbook registers. I listed everything. The down payment on his first car, the tuition payments, the rent supplements, the loans that were never repaid, the wedding contribution. The numbers climbed, staggering me. It was a fortune, a sum that could have funded a comfortable, worry-free retirement for myself. But it was more than just money. On a second sheet, I listed the emotional costs, the canceled plans, the swallowed insults, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety of walking on eggshells around Ava. The list was long and ugly. It was a detailed invoice for a lifetime of one-sided love. Seeing it all there in my own neat handwriting was horrifying and strangely liberating. It wasn't a memory or a feeling anymore. It was evidence. It was proof that I was not imagining things. I had been systematically exploited. I knew then that I couldn't fix this with a phone call or a tearful confrontation. The relationship I had with my son was an illusion, and the illusion was now shattered beyond repair. I needed help, but the thought of hiring a lawyer felt wrong. This wasn't a legal problem at its core. It was a sickness in my soul. The slap was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. I needed to understand how I had let this happen, how I had become a willing accomplice in my own erasure. I opened my laptop and searched for therapists in my area who specialized in family dynamics and emotional abuse. I found a man named Leonard, a therapist with kind eyes in his profile picture, and a list of credentials as long as my arm. My finger hovered over the request an appointment button for a full minute. It felt like a monumental step, an admission that I was broken. But as I looked at the dandelion outside, still standing tall, I knew it wasn't an admission of brokenness. It was the first step toward becoming whole. I clicked the button. My first session with Leonard was terrifying. I sat in a comfortable armchair across from him, clutching my purse in my lap like a shield. He was older, with a calm, reassuring presence that immediately put me at ease. He didn't push or pry. He simply asked, "Karen, what brings you here today?" And the dam broke. I told him everything, the story pouring out of me in a torrent of words and tears. I told him about Anthony, about my lonely marriage, about pouring all my hopes and dreams into Ethan. I told him about Ava, her subtle cruelty, her insatiable greed. And I told him about the slap. When I finished, I felt raw and exposed, expecting judgment or pity. Instead, Leonard just nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing that, Karen," he said, his voice gentle. "That took a great deal of courage. What you've described is a classic pattern of narcissistic abuse and financial exploitation. You were not a fool. You were a loving mother who was systematically manipulated." Hearing him say it, hearing a professional validate my reality, was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. For years I had blamed myself. I was too soft, too generous, too needy. Leonard helped me reframe my story. He taught me that my capacity for love and my instinct to provide were not weaknesses. They were strengths that had been weaponized against me. In our weekly sessions, we delved deep into my past. We talked about my relationship with my own parents, my need for approval, my fear of abandonment. He gave me tools, not weapons. He taught me about setting boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as fences to protect my own well-being. He helped me understand that saying no was not a selfish act, but an act of self-preservation. He gave me the language to describe what had happened to me, and in naming it, I began to reclaim my power over it. During this time, I reconnected with my neighbor Maria. She was a widow a few years older than me, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen it all. One afternoon, she saw me in my garden, listlessly pulling weeds, and came over with 2 cups of iced tea. "You look like you've been through the ringer," she said, settling into the chair beside me. I found myself telling her the whole story. She listened without interruption, her expression growing harder with every detail. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She reached over and patted my hand. "Vultures, Karen," she said, her voice firm. "That's what they are. They circle and wait, and they think because you're older you're weak. My own nephew tried it with me after my husband passed. Wanted me to sign the house over for his business venture. I told him to get lost and haven't spoken to him since. Best decision I ever made." Her simple, unwavering support was another pillar in my reconstruction. She made me feel less alone, less of a victim, and more like a survivor in a club neither of us wanted to join. The first test of my new resolve came about 3 weeks after the wedding. A call from an unknown number. I answered, and it was Ethan. His voice was strained, attempting a casualness that was utterly false. "Hey, Mom. Just calling to see how you are." I took a deep breath, picturing Leonard's calm face. "I am taking care of myself, Ethan," I said, my voice even and steady. There was a pause. This was not the response he expected. He was waiting for an opening, a crack in my composure he could exploit. "Look, Mom, about the wedding. Ava feels just terrible. She was under a lot of stress and she'd had a bit too much to drink. She's really sorry." I felt a familiar pang in my chest, the old instinct to smooth things over, to accept the non-apology and absolve him of his guilt. But Leonard's voice was in my head. "An apology that makes excuses is not an apology. Assaulting someone is not a symptom of stress, Ethan," I said calmly. "We have nothing to discuss right now." And then I did something I had never done before in my life. I hung up on my son. My hand was shaking, but my heart was steady. It was a beginning. Their campaign began in earnest after that. They moved from feigned concern to aggressive manipulation. They left long, rambling voicemails, Ava sobbing about how I was tearing the family apart, Ethan angrily accusing me of being selfish and unforgiving. They sent a flood of text messages, a barrage of guilt and blame. Then they started showing up at my house. The first time, I saw them pull into the driveway through the living room window. My stomach plummeted. The old Karen would have rushed to the door, anxious to appease them. The new Karen walked to the door, took a deep breath, and spoke through the intercom I'd had installed the week before. "You are not welcome here," I said, my voice amplified and clear. Ava's face, a mask of practiced sweetness, appeared on the small video screen. "Karen, please let us in. We just want to talk. We love you." It was a performance. "No," I said. "Leave my property." Their faces changed instantly. The sweetness curdled into rage. Ethan started banging on the door, yelling my name. I calmly called the police and reported a disturbance. They were gone by the time the patrol car arrived, but the message was sent. My home, which had once felt like a prison of obligation, was slowly becoming my sanctuary again. I changed the locks. I invested in a better security system. I started taking Maria's advice and planting a vegetable garden in the backyard, finding a simple, grounding pleasure in nurturing new life. The work with Leonard continued, and I was getting stronger every day. I started to see Ethan and Ava not as my beloved son and his difficult wife, but as two deeply damaged people whose greed had consumed them. My anger was transforming into a kind of detached pity. They were trapped in a cycle of their own making, and I was finally, blessedly, stepping out of it. I realized my hidden advantage was not a document or a legal loophole. It was my own clarity. I knew them. I knew what they wanted and I knew how they operated. And I was no longer afraid of them. I knew there had to be a final confrontation. They were not the type to simply give up and walk away. They saw my house as their prize, their rightful inheritance. I decided that this final act could not be just for me. It had to mean something more. I started volunteering at a local senior center, and I heard stories that mirrored my own in chilling detail. Children pressuring parents for money, isolating them from friends, emotionally blackmailing them for property. My personal pain began to connect to a larger, more systemic problem. I spoke with the director of the center, a compassionate woman named Eleanor, and told her a sanitized version of my story. She introduced me to a volunteer from a senior advocacy group, a group that helped elders who were victims of financial and emotional abuse. An idea began to form in my mind, a plan for a final curtain call on the drama Ethan and Ava had created. I sent them a text message, the first I had initiated in months. It was simple and direct. I am ready to discuss the future of the house. Please come over this Saturday at 2 o'clock. I knew they would be unable to resist. The promise of getting what they wanted would be an irresistible lure. They replied almost immediately, a single triumphant word from Ava's phone. Finally, the day arrived, a bright, clear autumn afternoon. I was nervous, but it was the nervousness of an actress before a performance, not the anxiety of a victim. Maria came over an hour early, along with my sister, Carol, who had always viewed Ethan's entitlement with a skeptical eye. Eleanor, the director from the senior center, arrived with them. I explained the full plan to them. Maria just grinned. "Give him hell, Karen," she said. I hid them in the dining room with the door slightly ajar, so they could hear everything that transpired in the living room. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ethan and Ava on my doorstep. They were dressed up, as if for a business meeting. Ava was carrying a bottle of overpriced wine and a bouquet of flowers, props for a scene of loving reconciliation. She swept past me into the house, placing the flowers on the hall table. "Oh, Karen, it's so good to see you," she gushed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We've been so worried. We're so glad you've come to your senses." Ethan looked uncomfortable, unable to meet my eyes. I led them into the living room and invited them to sit on the sofa. I remained standing. "So," Ava began, getting straight to the point, "we've had our lawyers draw up some preliminary paperwork. It's just a simple transfer of deed. It will be so much easier to handle things now before you get any older, you know? We can sell the place, get a good price in this market, and you can move into a lovely assisted living facility. We've even picked one out for you. It has a garden." She spoke about my life as if I were a piece of luggage to be conveniently stored. Ethan finally spoke, his voice wavering. "Mom, it's for the best. We can't take care of this big house, and you shouldn't be here all alone. We want to be able to look after you." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They wanted to look after my assets, not me. I let them talk for nearly 20 minutes. I let them lay out their entire greedy vision. They talked about the renovations they would do before selling, the profits they would make, the new life they would build. They never once asked me what I wanted. They spoke of me in the third person, as if I were not even in the room. I stood there, a silent, impassive statue, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. The woman who would have wept, who would have pleaded, who would have given in was gone. In her place was a woman made of steel. When they finally wound down, looking at me expectantly, waiting for my compliance, I spoke. "I have heard what you have to say." I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet room. "And I have to say, I am astounded by the depth of your entitlement and the poverty of your character." Ava's smile froze on her face. Ethan's head snapped up. "Now," I continued, "I have some people here who I believe should also hear your plans. I walked over to the dining room door and opened it wide. Maria, my sister Carol, and Eleanor stepped into the living room. The color drained from Ava's face. Ethan looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "You know my sister and my neighbor," I said. "And this is Eleanor. She's the director of a wonderful advocacy group that protects senior citizens from people like you." I turned my attention back to my son and his wife. Their shock was a delicious, bitter nectar. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice ringing with an authority they had never heard from me before. "You will never get this house. You will never get another penny from me. The bank of Mom is permanently closed." I looked directly at Ava. "You slapped me. You assaulted me in public and humiliated me on what should have been my son's happiest day. You did it because you see me as an obstacle, a thing to be removed so you can get what you want." Then I looked at my son, my only child. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a final lingering sorrow. "You stood there and you let her. You abandoned me, Ethan. Not just at the wedding but for years. You traded your mother for a life of ease, funded by my sacrifice." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Ava had regained her composure and was now glaring at me with pure hatred. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "We're your family." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "Family? You don't know the meaning of the word." Now, for the final piece of business. I have met with my financial planner. I have redrafted my will. This house, upon my death, along with all my remaining assets, will be donated in its entirety to Eleanor's foundation, to be used to create a fund to provide legal and emotional support for victims of elder abuse. The silence in the room was absolute. Ava's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The public humiliation was complete, not with a slap, but with the cold, hard truth. "Now," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. "Get out of my house." They left without another word, a tableau of defeated greed. I watched them go from my front window, and as their car sped away, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence of freedom. My sister hugged me tightly. Maria squeezed my arm. Eleanor simply smiled, a look of deep respect in her eyes. The war was over. I had not just survived, I had won. I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and my future. The locks on the doors were no longer to keep intruders out, they were to keep my peace in. In the months that followed, I blossomed. I became a fierce advocate, a dedicated volunteer at the senior center. I shared my story first anonymously, then as my confidence grew with my name attached. I found that my pain, once a source of shame, could be transformed into a source of strength for others. I helped other men and women recognize the signs of manipulation, find the courage to set boundaries and reclaim their own lives. My house, once the object of my son's greed, became a hub of activity. I hosted potlucks for my new friends, meetings for the advocacy group, and gardening clubs with Maria. It was filled with laughter and respect, with people who saw me for who I was, not for what I had. I traveled, taking a trip to Italy I had dreamed of my whole life, paid for with the money that was finally, unequivocally my own. I never heard from Ethan or Ava again. I learned through my sister that their marriage was already showing cracks, their bond apparently not strong enough to survive without a steady stream of my money to lubricate it. I felt a brief, fleeting sadness for the son I had lost, but he had been lost to me long before that final day. I had mourned him, and now I was moving on. My life was my own, rich and full and defined by my own terms. I had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all, that true wealth has nothing to do with property or bank accounts. It is the quiet dignity of self-respect, the freedom of a life lived without fear, and the joy of a purpose that extends beyond yourself. The slap that had once felt like an ending was, in fact, a brutal but necessary beginning. It was the blow that had awakened me from a long, troubled sleep, and I was determined to never close my eyes again. What would you do in my place? Have you ever had to stand up to family to protect yourself? I read all your comments, and your stories give me strength. Please write me where you heard this story from. It's always fascinating to see how far these experiences reach. If this story resonated with you, please like the video and subscribe to my channel for more content that empowers and inspires. There are many other stories waiting for you. Your support helps me continue this important work. And if you feel inclined, you can use the Super Thanks feature to make a donation. Every little bit helps me bring these narratives to light. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.